I'm glad that you're joining us. Just to kind of welcome the people who are streaming in as we're starting to talk here.
Sure.
This is the fourth and final ACP Spotlight conversation here on Instagram Live, the fourth conversation of the month of the festival. And if people are just tuning in and want to see the three others or an archive of this, they'll be available on our YouTube channel, which is acpinfo.org/AC/YouTube. acpinfo.org/YouTube. So those four conversations will appear there. The four artists that we've talked to are all featured artists on the Georgia Fence, which is on the west side of the Atlanta Beltline, right where it crosses Martin Luther King Jr. Drive. And I was just out there this weekend, got to see Chris's work. And welcome, Chris. And we'd love to talk to you more about your work and the project specifically and how it all came together.
Excellent. Thank you.
So your project is photographs from Appalachia, which may be a new term for people. Can you give folks a little bit of a background as to what the pictures or what the photographs are of?
Yeah, most definitely. So just to give a little background, a little context on the word Appalachia, back in the 90s, there was a symposium of poets in the Appalachian Mountains. And there were several African-American poets. And if you looked up Appalachia in the dictionary, it referred to the Scottish, Irish immigrants that reside in the mountains. And the African-American poets said, well, what about us? We're not Scottish, we're not Irish. And one gentleman by the name of Frank X. Walker, who was actually the first African-American poet laureate of Kentucky, who was born and raised in Appalachia, coined the phrase Appalachia. And now if you actually go to the dictionary, it's a new word that was formed in the 90s, and it refers to folks that are of African-American heritage or generally people of color that reside in and whose ancestors are from the mountains. And this project came into existence. It kind of, you know how so many things come from different directions, but I've been camping and hiking and just loving the mountains ever since I was a kid. Mm-hmm. And I always felt like it was, kind of like this homogeneous society. You mainly thought it was a bunch of white folks. And then as I started to dig deeper, I found out how diverse it was. And then I had a beautiful turn of events. There's a woman by the name of Marie Cochran, and Marie formed the Appalachian Artist Project. And Marie reached out to me, and we just, if you look at the visual representations of Appalachia, people of color have really been greatly overlooked. And then so often when you look at things that look at Appalachia, it's kind of really showing the poverty and a lot of negative stereotypes. And Marie being from the mountains kind of gave me my foot in the door, and she took me to a little church in Cullowhee, North Carolina, far western North Carolina. And there were only maybe 6 people at the service that day, and there was an older woman, and I made some really nice photos of her, and I made an appointment to come back the next week and interview her, and she passed away within that week. And then I just started, the more I dug, I found out how there were all these communities, and African Americans have been in the mountains for hundreds of years, but these communities are completely disappearing, and I felt like I needed to get in and have a visual representation. Like, this is history that won't be here. It won't, 50 years from now, I mean, everything's changing, and it's not only changing for African Americans, it's changing for a lot of the natives of Appalachia. There's a lot of people buying up the land, and someone dies and the land is dispersed. But man, there's so many wonderful stories you'll find, like Ebony Drive in Sylva, North Carolina, and Liberia, South Carolina. Wow. And it's really deep, and it's really important for me to show the diversity and to also show the dignity and the honor of the people that live there. Because I've just, man, the people there have just taken me in like family. It's and I come from a biracial family. My father is black, my mother is white. So I've always been interested in stories that deal with race and stereotypes. And I love to kind of flip the script when it comes to stereotypes, because it's just such a closed-minded point of view.
Mm-hmm.
And so, yeah, I started at that church. That woman died. It gave me a real sense of urgency. And, I've tried to get some funding. We got a little bit of funding from the Highlander Center under a small grant called the We Shall Overcome grant, which is money generated from the song We Shall Overcome.
Yeah.
And that kind of spearheaded it. But since then, I've just been doing it on my own dime, sleeping on people's couches, sleeping in my car, throwing up my tent, whatever I can do. And my long-term goal is I really want to do a book. I want to donate it to the different schools.
Uh-huh.
This is a part of American history that people just don't know about.
It's amazing in you giving the history, this kind of backstory, that it's a new coining. It's this kind of new way to think about that area, but it's always existed. It just hasn't.
Yeah.
It hasn't been referred to in a certain way, and it makes me think back to the discussion we had earlier a couple weeks ago with the photographer Arvind Temkar, who's on the fence with you, and talking about the history of music and how bluegrass and old time country music, especially out of Appalachia, has African instruments, rhythms, melodies, is all a part of it, mixing with the Scotch Irish stuff. And that's, Bill Monroe knew about that and talked about that. It's
right.
Amazing how deep the African American history is in that region, yet it still hasn't caught hold in the public imagination.
It's 100% right. Yeah, it's really so beautiful because although racism has been rampant everywhere for a long, long time, a lot of the folks in the mountains have really learned how to live together in harmony. And of course, there's always those instances, but the folks that are Affrilachian, they're just as much Appalachian as they are African American.
Sure.
It really is like when you go to the church services and the pastor is making references to Patsy Cline and references to the bears and just the wildlife. And it's just a whole different vibe than what you'll find anyplace else. It really is a beautiful part of American history that more people should be aware of. And what I'm finding is that once people find out about it, I mean, they love it. And I've even spoken to people that live in the mountains that don't know about it, that don't know about the history, because it's just, for one reason or another, it's just been overlooked.
Now, what happened to you when you were in this church service, or when you kind of were in that part of of North Carolina, I believe you said you were? Yes. And you had this appointment, and you realized people were starting to fade away, for lack of a better term. When you got back to Atlanta or wherever you were living, like as a photographer, what were kind of your next steps about, like, you know what, I got to go here and I want to go here? And what did the process look like over time? Have you been working on this for a couple of years?
I have been working on it. I was just shooting last week, photographing some guys bear hunting. I'm still working on this project. I'm going to keep working on it. This might be a project I'll work on until the day I die. Mm-hmm. I'm really, really connected, and the families, it just, it's like anything. It's you pull back the layers and it just gets deeper and deeper. But once I came home and this beautiful woman had passed away, I was like, I've got to go full steam ahead with this project, and I really need to start focusing on the elderly. So I started going into communities and trying to say, who's the oldest person? Who's the elder here? So I would go out, photograph. I was doing some oral histories, and I'm not a videographer, but I'd set up my video camera, set up my recorder, and just to record it. And so I've been working on this project since 2016, 4 years. In the 4 years I've been working on this, 9 people have passed away that I photographed.
Wow.
And it's just a continuous thing. And now I'm just like so thankful that I have that documentation. And then I've had family members reach out to me, and they are so thankful, And so my first plan of attack was let's focus on these folks. I brought in a gentleman who's been a mentor of mine for years and years, named Chuck Dye, and Chuck has a history in fine art and documentary as well. So Chuck went up with me. We did interviews together. Mm-hmm. Marie Cochran was helping me line up things with different folks. And then I met a beautiful woman named Ann Woodford. And Ann is from the mountains. She wrote a great book that deals with the whole history of African Americans in Western North Carolina. So once I got a nice blanket of the elderly folks, then I started kind of going in more with middle-aged folks and younger folks. And now I'm finding there's so many biracial families in the mountains.
That's amazing.
Yeah, and that's really like a whole nother project I really would love to do, man. But it's, I do live in Atlanta and I do have to make a living, and I am doing this on my own. And I've applied for a bunch of grants and things, and unfortunately nothing's come through yet, but I'm really hopeful that some things are in the horizon. I'm hoping that maybe through the exposure of the fence and folks will see the validity and the value and the urgency of the situation.
The pictures from your project are extraordinary, and while we were out there, I brought my 2 children out there who, like you, are kind of children of a biracial marriage, and
cool.
Our daughter is 8 and was looking at your pictures pretty astutely. She's been around photographs and photography a lot, and she had questions. She's like, "Well, who are these people?" And as I started walking her through it, I was able to communicate with her that these pictures are factual. These are real people in a real place, and here's a little bit about what's happening. But they're also of a mood. They have a really substanceful vibe to them.
Thank you.
Instagram Live changed up how it works, and I can't load in pictures from my camera roll. I can only load in pictures that have been shared on Instagram. So I just loaded that one in. I'm not really sure. I'm covering you up. This is a representation of how.
That's fine. I don't need to be there.
How your photographs look on the fence. But for people who might be tuning in from out of the area, can you talk a little bit about the geographical boundaries? I know that some of these are taken from North Georgia, perhaps, or can you talk about just the area that you're working on?
Yeah, so as of right now, I've only been able to focus on Western North Carolina, Jackson County, Cherokee County, Haywood County, and in North Georgia, White County, Raven County. Now, oddly enough, the curators from PhotoBuild, all the photos that are on display are actually from Georgia. So if folks, of course, well, not of course, but my website has a larger selection of photos, but it's still a small sampling of everything that I have. But that's where I am. I really, really want to go into Tennessee. There's so many folks that they have family like over the mountain, and because the African American communities were so small, and of course you can't intermarry, a lot of folks would have to go into Georgia or North Carolina to find a spouse. And but through the church has always been a place of refuge and safety for folks in the mountains, a place where people could have freedom. But the one photo there of the young lady where it's just her feet and a sawdust floor.
Right.
That is, it's amazing, Michael. This is a camp meeting. I would love to take you there sometime. It's a arbor that was built in 1886 by former slaves. The same arbor still stands there. Now, they've had situations where the KKK have come through and vandalized it and things have been burned down. But every year since 1886, people have gone there for this camp meeting. So like that young lady, like her great-great-grandparents were there. And it's, so yeah, I've gone up there and set up my tent and camped out. And yeah, it's just been such a cool experience.
Can you describe to our listeners and to me what specifically you mean by an arbor?
Oh, an arbor. So an outdoor, for lack of a better word, would be like a really large gazebo.
Sure.
It's like an open air. So, and I don't have any photos to show you right now, but it's the logs. It's like these hand hewn logs. I mean, you can see where the saw blades came down, and it's a tin roof, and it has these old timey church pews, and the whole floor is sawdust. And then around it, they call them tents, but they're kind of like these little, like one room structures where people could cook and sleep and stay out of the elements. Because folks come up for it used to be people would come up for the whole week. But now, something that used to be, more than 100 people would come. Now, unfortunately, the numbers have dwindled and maybe, 35 or 40 people show up. But it's an outdoor structure, and when you're there, I mean, you just feel like this is holy ground.
Wow.
It's really, really powerful. And there's a mountain across the way, and there's a gentleman, Mr. Cecil Dorsey, who's in his 80s, and tells me about how his family used to own that mountain, and how they used to go rabbit hunting and pick the blackberries and the blueberries, and now that mountain, is owned by, probably I think predominantly the white folks now, because what happens is you have a large family, the father and mother pass away, it's passed on to the kids. Some kids move to Atlanta, Chattanooga, Asheville for better opportunity. The land gets sold, and then before you know it, that history is gone. But there used to be a school there. There's an old graveyard there, but a lot of it's kind of overgrown. You have to kind of know where to look.
Is there a sustaining industry or a specific type of business that supports that, or that's traditionally been a kind of glue for the community there? Or is it just as varied as everybody else?
It's as varied as everyone else. Now, there's an amazing community named Texana, which is outside of Murphy, North Carolina, and it was formed by a former slave. Do you know where that's at?
I've been to Murphy. I am a Murphy, so I try to log that in my mind.
Yeah. Well, that makes total sense, brother. So if you were to go look for Texana Road, back in the 1800s, after the Emancipation Proclamation, a teenage slave by the name of Texas and a couple other women went up on this mountaintop, built a lean-to, and started a community, and it became known all around that it was a refuge for African Americans and Native Americans. And they had a completely self-sufficient community. They had their own stores, their own barbershops, their own water tower. People would trade hogs for pigs, and it was just it was a beautiful thing. And so that's where I was at last weekend, photographing a gentleman by the name of Mark Pickens, bear hunting. He's one of the last guys up there that still goes out and goes hunting and things like that. But there's still the remnant of those original people going back to Texana that still live there. And if you ever want to go to an awesome church service, there's a church right up there on the top, and Pastor Webb drives in from Dahlonega, Georgia, him and his beautiful wife Susie, and man, it's powerful. And it's just amazing to me how the people will just take you in. It doesn't matter what color you are. It doesn't matter how old you are. If you come with a loving spirit, it's going to be reciprocal.
Chris, your stories about this area are so evocative and powerful. It's really cool to hear them. And it makes me think that perhaps this place is a real kind of power source for you in your personal life down here in this urban malaise of Atlanta. Can you talk a little bit about how working on this has affected you as a person?
Yeah, I can, and I'll just give you a little backstory. So I worked at the state newspaper in South Carolina for about 10 years, and we had a great photo staff, and man, they used to do great things with photos. I mean, just so much freedom. So I just always loved long-term photo projects. Like, that's what I love. I would do the daily grind of photojournalism, but it was like these in-depth and trying to capture the mood, like you were talking about, like that intimate photography. And that's where my heart is. And when I moved to Atlanta, I was just trying to make a living. I'm shooting all these corporate events and all this and all that. And like inside, I was like drying up. And I was like, I've got to find another project. But I know that when you find a project, it has to be something that you're passionate about and something that you want to wake up and go do. And so, like, I love the mountains and I love history. And I grew up in a little small African-American church. You know what I mean? So, like, it's like going home when I go up there. Like, it's like going home. And so it really feeds my soul, man. And I'm not a hunter. I'm not a fisherman. I'm not like, I didn't grow up like that, but, I respect it. And, but I am a Christian, and man, I just have so much love for the strong faith that the people have.
Yeah.
I've thought about, like, there's a house for sale in Texana.
He's moving.
Yeah, brother. And if I could make if I can make a living up there, but right now Atlanta is where I need to be. Atlanta is home right now. But yeah, it feeds my soul. And it's like, even if I go up and I don't make a nice photo, you know, sometimes you don't make a nice photo.
Absolutely.
And that's just the way it is. But I'm still in the mountains. You know, it's like I'm in the mountains. So it's a beautiful thing. Yeah.
So you mentioned early in our discussion today, kind of future plans, thinking about turning this into a book, looking for funding, want more people to kind of become aware of the project. Can you talk about kind of your best thoughts for the future of this project? Is there documentary filmmaking interest? Is there radio stories? Are you very specific about what you're thinking?
I know what my strengths are. My strength lies in storytelling photography. I'm not a videographer. Now, if someone wanted to come beside me and have a heart and a passion for it, then I would welcome them. If there was a podcast or someone that I would gladly introduce them to people. Like for me, this isn't about me. You know, this is just about trying to preserve history and get these stories down, document people while they're still there, document communities while they're still there. So my dream is to do a really great book. I would love to maybe bring in some of the Appalachian poets. There's actually the Appalachian poets, a group of poets. I would love to bring in some of their photography alongside of me. Marie Cochran is meeting with the folks at the Center for Documentary Studies this Friday to try and talk about a book, you know. But, you know, everything comes down to funding. But in my mind, I want to get it out. I want people to know about it. I teach photography at Pace Academy part-time. And I was showing my 6th graders the work. And like, I told them, I said, you won't learn about this in your history class. It's not in the history books. So like my dream is to do a great book and donate them to the public schools, you know, get them out there. And then folks like Ann Woodford and other folks that are from the area that have stories that I don't have, you know. They have stories of their grandparents, you know, and I would love to travel around and tell people about it. And I would love to do a traveling exhibit, you know, and not just in the South, but, you know, all over the place. So, I mean, that's my dream. You know, it just takes some money and people that have a heart for this, you know.
Well, speaking for myself, and I know folks in the ACP office, we love the photos and we're glad that they're on the fence. Just as a reminder, as we wrap up here, that the Georgia fence is on the Atlanta Beltline's Westside Trail where it crosses MLK Junior Drive. It'll be up there until the spring. So there's time, but there's no time like the present, right? To get over there.
That's right.
And take a look at Chris's work, Terry Darnell's work, Arvin Tempker's work, Andrew Filer's work, and more. And we appreciate all of you joining us for these weekly conversations. This will be archived on our YouTube channel at acpinfo.org/YouTube. I want to thank you, Chris Aluka Berry, for illuminating your project and for educating us and showing us a slice of the world that you've made some really evocative images of. So congratulations and thanks.
Thank you, Michael. Thank you for your time. I want to just show some love to the curators. Man, I just think they did a great job. The sequencing, the printing, everything is like top notch. Like, I'm just so thankful.
We'll pass it along. Cheers.
I will.
Chris. Take care.
All right, brother. Peace. Bye.